Welcome to the Triage Method podcast with me, Gary McGowan, and my co-host, Mr. Patrick Farrell. Paddy, how are you this week?
As per usual, I am positively fantastic, Gary. I've spent basically the guts of a week with you this week. Sorry, 3 days would have felt like an eternity.
What a
And
what a great week.
it really wasn't. However, we did get an absolutely astounding amount of content done for the Coach's Corner, which is obviously launching later this year, as everyone is aware, obviously, if they're listening to
Of
this.
course.
Um, if they're not, they can read more about it in the link in the description below. But yeah, it was quite good. Like I was even learning stuff as we were going through some different like range of motion assessments and different machines and stuff. The videos also turned out very, very nice. I have to say, Gary, you did a fantastic job with all of that. Um, but anyway, that is somewhat tangential to the conversation we're going to have here, which is how do I safely return to training now that the gyms are opening? Because in Ireland, at least, like I know, obviously there's global people listening to this all over the world. But in Ireland, we basically have a week until gyms open, or so we're told. Our benevolent overlords have said, yeah, 9 more days, well, 8 more days, 7 more days by the time people are listening to this on Monday. They've said, yeah, you can actually return to your businesses and you can actually return to normal life. So that was quite nice of them to do that for us. But it does raise obviously some issues for people that are kind of like, all right, well, I've been doing all this like at home stuff, this body weight stuff, and maybe I picked up a few weights, and people have been taken along with training, but maybe they haven't been loading heavily. Maybe they haven't been, really progressively overloading. Maybe they've been doing exercises that maybe don't fit their body as well. Maybe, like they've been doing like a squat and they're like, it doesn't really work that well for me. I usually do like a hack squat or a leg press or something. So how do we safely return to training and maximize the results we're able to get going forward? Gary, so where do we start thinking about this?
Yeah, so firstly, just to get it out of the way, if you want to minimize any and all risk from a actual coronavirus perspective, it might be wise to be on top of your hygiene, so make sure that you have the ability to wash your hands. You might need to bring hand sanitizer to the gym with you or whatever. I'm an absolute devil for touching my face and kind of pulling at my nose and that sort of stuff, Slavoj Zizek style. But in general, like what I would say to you is that try not to do that. If you do that, like me, if you're someone like me, then it would be advisable to just bring some sort of hand sanitizer to the gym, maybe some tissues so you can wipe down the equipment before you use it. Maybe consider wearing a mask. I think the guidelines are suggesting that we do wear some sort of face coverings when we do return to the gym. Obviously, that depends on the type of activity that you'll be returning to. We'll be returning to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Don't think people will be wearing masks doing
You have
Jiu-Jitsu.
rash guards that come up to a bucket.
Yeah. Morph suits, remember those? But yeah, basically, like, sort out your hygiene stuff, check out the public health advice. Like, this isn't the place that we're going to be sharing that. We're trying to
And
focus.
also, just on that, gyms are only allowed open in the context that they're already providing that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I know a good few gyms have put up like plexiglass type thing or whatever it's called in between machines and
Yeah.
in front of stuff like squat racks that perhaps face out, and because obviously we're like spitting everywhere. Same as again in like front of treadmills and stuff, because people obviously running, breath going forward and everything. So some gyms have done that, but that's not necessarily a requirement, but they are required to have, alcohol, hand sanitizer. Well, maybe not alcohol, but they have to have hand sanitizer, and also they're generally going to have an increase in the amount of people that are going around cleaning. They generally, I think they're supposed to do some stuff in terms of, you're only allowed to come in for X amount of time and you have to book in. I don't know if all gyms are doing that, but I know some gyms, like obviously I live in Dublin, I know some gyms have like quite a few thousand members. So obviously they have to be a little bit more coherent in terms of how many people they're letting in at a certain time. Because again, I could easily go over what's allowed, like 250 or something people in a place. I think that's the current guideline.
Yeah, I
And
think it's only 50 indoors, so I don't know if that still stands
something
and
like
it still
that. You know what
means
I mean? Like
institution, but
there's a certain amount of people you can let in, so they have to be a bit more on the ball with that stuff. Um, but yeah, most gyms are being proactive. Like the gym doesn't want to be closed down, so they're going to be as proactive as possible to keep the members safe, and then also keep the gym open. So yeah, they should have all that sort of stuff provided. But as Gary said, that doesn't just exempt you from like good hygiene practices in terms of like, again, like not touching your nose if possible, not touching your eyeballs, not like licking your fingers, and not touching, then, or not doing that and then touching machines and stuff. So yeah, just wipe down machines before and after use, and wash your hands frequently. And if you want, you can wear a face mask. Everyone's always back and forth whether that's beneficial or not beneficial. So you have to make up your own decision on that.
yeah, it is the guidelines at the moment. Try to wear masks. So if you want to be precautious for yourself and others, might be wise. But anyway, other than that, guys, I'll have a shower after the gym. That's actually something that's useful. Like if you're having a shower in the gym rather than waiting until you go home, that might be something.
I don't think the
Um,
gyms are allowed to have their showers open. Just,
oh, really?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I was going to say that would be a good step in terms of like if you're going home to family or whatever, or you're going straight to work. But anyway, look, they're personal and gym related decisions. For now, what we want to focus on is the actual training side of things, and to some degree, potentially the nutrition side of things, but mainly the training side of things. Because hopefully, you have all continued eating during this time, and you're not just like, "Geez, I can't wait to finish my 4-month fast" or whatever.
It was
But
easy.
you haven't been training proactively. Well, some of you may have, to be fair, but many people, from my experience, kind of coaching people online during this time, people have struggled. People have struggled to keep the head in the game. Especially if you have been very dependent all along on having gym equipment accessible, training in a particular manner. When that gets stripped away from you, it can be very difficult to stay motivated. If someone was training a lot of jiu-jitsu, or you were training a lot of boxing or something like that you had to be with someone for, like obviously it was difficult to keep training that throughout that period of time. And I know a lot of people who felt like they just went from doing 6 nights a week of training to 0 because they just had no motivation to do it. So it all depends on what your initial drive for training was. But for the most part, I think a lot of people will definitely be operating below the level that they were at in March, let's say, especially when it comes to maximal fitness characteristics, things like your maximal strength, for example, or maybe the maximum amount of muscle that you've had. You're potentially not at that peak at the moment because you haven't had the chance to really nail down those characteristics. So in terms of maximal strength training, yeah, you may have been doing, plenty of bodyweight squats or kettlebell squats for high reps, and that might have been going really well. But you probably haven't been training your 1 rep max squat, for example. A lot of people won't have been doing that. So ultimately our goal now is to try and figure out how can we get back to that and do so in a way that is, one, safe, so that we're not, increasing risk of injury in any way, but also productive in that we're potentiating future gains, because that is part of this. What you do now does influence the gains that you get in the future. And the extreme example of that would be the case of someone who does get injured, because if you do go back to the gym in your first week and you're like, new program, let's go on to, I don't know, T Nation or whatever, or you follow whoever you follow and you take their program and you take the hardest version of it and you take the most intense week and you get stuck right into it on week 1, that's probably not going to be a good time. It's not going to be very productive. And even if you just, you just tweak your hamstring because you did 15 sets, then what happens to you is you can't train hamstrings now for 3 months or whatever, or you can't train them at their maximum level for 3 months. And now you've taken away from your gains in the future purely because of kind of not being able to tame that ego initially, or that excitement, more or less, because it is justifiable. I understand people have not been training, and now it's summer as well. That's another thing, is that especially if you're a student like me, this is the time that you can actually really start to put time into training, because you mightn't be able to go 100% the other times of the year. So it is one of those times where you're like, I need to make the absolute most out of these next 10 weeks until I get back to college or whatever. Or maybe you're a parent or some. I was going to say you're a parent and you have
You're a
more time
teacher.
that the
You're a
kids
teacher.
are off school. Teacher's a good example. I was going to say parent who has kids at home, and I was like, wait, no, that's actually the opposite way around. Sorry.
They have less time.
You have probably have less time. But yeah, basically, we need to be smart about this. So like when we start to think about this as well, what you have to ask yourself, because I think it's more important to actually ask this question first: what's the goal with getting back to training? You know, what's your actual goal as you return to the gym? Because, you know, for some people, they might be like, look, I'm feeling skinny. It's time to go on this big bulk. It's bulk time. And you double your calories as you head into June 29th, and you're training the highest volume training program that you can. And for others, you know, it might be the case that, you know, you've gained a little bit of weight and now you're like, all right, now it's time to diet. I need to diet immediately. Time to get on that program that burns as many calories as possible. So
What
in
if
all
you're
these
like me,
cases,
Gary, and you've gained fat and lost
you're skinny fat
5 kilos of muscle?
and less fit
Well, that too.
and
What do you do
probably
then?
worse at jiu-jitsu.
Oh, definitely. What do you do then?
Honestly, I'd probably just
Give
give
up?
up.
I
I
give up.
just, yeah,
That's what I was planning on doing
I
anyway.
would just give up.
Just on this before we get into this, because it can seem a bit like esoteric or, you know, kind of out there. You know, people can understand that, like, oh, you know, injury happens and when you're like really pushing training really hard. But I don't want you to. I want you to basically frame this entire conversation of, or this entire conversation with the fact that, right, lifting is a skill. So even if you've been training hard, you've been like, yeah, I've been, you know, pushing myself. I picked up a bit of kit, I did whatever, got a few dumbbells, whatever. You had some stuff in your head. So even if you've been training away the whole time, like that's what I was doing, right? But we went in to record videos in the gym this last week, and just even doing a few different machines, like all these little muscles that normally for me it's the no factor. They were the things that I was feeling more so in terms of things didn't feel as stable. They didn't feel as steady. Like say, for example, I'm doing a bench press and my wrists, you know, normally it'd be no factor. I'd be like, the bar just sits nicely. My wrists feel nice and strong, but you know, there's a little bit of wobble here. And like, I wasn't coordinating the movement as effectively, you know, and even though my muscles, in terms of the major muscles, like my chest muscles, my triceps, the shoulders, whatever, like they felt like they had way more in the tank. It was all these little muscles that just weren't like, they just weren't coordinating like I wanted them to, and as a result, the movements felt unstable. Same again with something like a squat. You know, it's like I'm not sitting into it doing a front squat because that's the only way I squat. And I'm not sitting into it as effectively. Like my knees kind of feel like they're just not quite there. My ankles are just like, you know, there's a little bit of wobble here. My spine isn't, you know, all the little things there. They were just a little off, right? And obviously, if you're feeling the same way that I was feeling, and I was like, yeah, my muscles feel kind of good to go, like the major muscles, and you can be lulled into this false sense of, actually, you know what, I can push hard with training. You know, I've
Yeah.
been keeping some adaptations, you know, alive, and with the training I've been doing, so I should be able to get straight back into it. But that's one of the worst, I'd say, ideas you could have for this time period, because it is going to be these smaller things that are the limiting factors in terms of your ability to progress your training going forward, and as a result, you know, increase your likelihood of getting injured. Because again, these smaller little stabilizing things, like again, like you're doing your bench press and your wrists are all over the place, and even if you're like, yeah, normally I know 100 kilos for sets of 8, and you're doing it, and you're like, yeah, this feels grand. You're noticing every time you do it, your wrists are all over the place. That's how injury happens. You know, well, that's one way injury happens, you know, because you're leaking all that energy all over the place, you know. And so I do want people to keep that in mind. Even if you are going into this, you go into the gym day one, you're like, you know what, I actually feel pretty good, you know. I thought I was going to have to, you know, ease into things, but nah, you know what, I'm just going to go balls to the wall. I feel good. You know, you're going to have to hold yourself back a little bit.
100%. And I mean, like, I've had multiple anecdotes of where this becomes relevant already, as well. Like, as you said, we were doing those videos the other day, and we did a workout or two between that. And for the most part, you know, I was actually fine because I've been doing a bit of training into, like, I have the barbell and stuff. So I've been doing some basic stuff. And, I've been doing a lot of things like push-ups and, been doing some sprint training, some hill sprints, a little bit of kickboxing training. So different types of things that I have been training away at and doing bits here and there, and doing a bit of running. But what I hadn't done was a full kind of weight training session, including machines, taking muscles into different ranges of motion and whatnot. And one of the things that actually hammered me was the leg curl. We did some sets on the seated leg curl, and as I was saying in the videos we're recording, the seated leg curl is just the best hamstring exercise. So
You,
I'm done with being diplomatic about exercises. From now on, I pick my favorite, and that's it, right? So
look, if everyone else is doing it, we might as well.
everyone else everyone else does it. So from my perspective now, seated leg curl is the Chad of leg curl or hamstring exercise. But
I'll
anyway,
start saying lower leg development.
lower leg development. But yeah, anyway, seated leg curl, right, guys? Fantastic exercise. But for that reason, it absolutely rips your hamstrings apart, trains them so effectively. But one of the unique things about the seated leg curl is that, it does take your hamstrings into the lengthened range, the stretched position, under quite a bit of a load and in a controlled manner. And you're ultimately the one that decides how much you go into that stretch position. But in general, if you're doing an exercise like that, the seated leg curl or something like an RDL, for example, those types of exercises are generally going to be the ones that catch you on the return to training, because you will have lost those adaptations to being more resistant to that kind of lengthened range loading under stretch. So when you do start to kind of think about the from a program design perspective, I may as well just talk about exercise selection as the first component to this, and then we can move on. When you're thinking about your program design, first think about the types of exercises that you have been exposing yourself to over the lockdown period, and then start to think about, okay, I can obviously do higher volumes of those as I start off, but it's less likely that I'm going to be able to do the same level of volume on exercises that train muscles and movements that I haven't been training at all. Okay. So an example of that would be if you're someone who's been doing, let's say you've been doing lots of push-ups, and push-ups are a very effective way to train upper body strength, and things like pull-ups and inverted rows. So you've been making the most of a lot of your upper body training because, you just had access to those tools. However, for your lower body training, you ran a 5K here and there, you did lots of body weight squats, maybe you got a few Nordic curls or something in, but overall, it was far from your standard, let's say, high volume lower body training days. Because generally I would say there's a far bigger difference between those types of kind of light lower body sessions that people do and the way that they train in the gym, at least in our audience, than in something like a calisthenics workout that you can do in the park for your upper body. You can get a really good stimulus in the upper body that way. So then what you might say to yourself is, okay, so I have been challenging the upper body muscles far more than I've been challenging the lower body muscles. So what I'm going to do is build a program that's based around distributing volume in favor of the upper body in phase one, let's say the first 4 weeks of your training program, with the intent of building up the amount of lower body volume that you're doing in a way that is, productive, so that you can actually go forward and then train those muscles again as normal from
Yeah,
phase
which
two
just
onwards.
on that can be really hard to do because you've probably been hammering away in the upper body for the last 4 months, and you're like, oh,
Yeah,
can't wait to get into get stuck into some like proper lower body training. And now we're telling you to like maybe you kind of continue that for a little bit as you get accustomed to loading a little bit heavier with the lower body. So I do understand that this can be quite hard in practice to do because I know a lot of people are like chomping at the bit to get going with lower body training, but jumping into the deep end with it is probably not the best way to go.
100%. And I mean, like, that just is a reality of returning to training, is that you're going to have the most excitement about your goals and about returning to training, but you're going to have the least preparedness to do the training that's required for you to reach those goals. So it is, a little bit of a difficult situation to navigate, but that's why we're recording this podcast, and hopefully you can use your reason to be able to get over those initial couple of weeks, and then you will feel far better for it. Like, so from an exercise selection perspective, think about, right, what have I been training before? Like, I can't tell you exactly what that was. It might be the case that you were doing, like, I don't know, you have a kettlebell at home and you've been doing 10 sets of 50 kettlebell squats every day, and your lower body might be very resilient. But ultimately, it just depends on what you've been doing. So think about what you have been doing, then build your program from the starting point with a volume that's distributed. So the number of sets that you do distribute a little bit more towards the things that you know you have greater tolerance to at this point, a little bit less towards that which you have less tolerance to, and then think about the actual nature of the exercises themselves. So when I say the exercises themselves, I'm mainly talking about the range of motion that's being challenged. So as I said, an RDL and a seated leg curl, they're examples of exercises that challenge muscles in their length and range and are generally going to lead to more muscle soreness and more difficulty recovering from those challenges. So what you might say to yourself is, if you're featuring exercises like that, or something like, let's say, a deep dumbbell chest fly, something like that, or a dumbbell pullover, any exercise essentially where you are challenging muscles in their length and range, you might say to yourself then that I'm going to be more aggressive, or soft rather, more soft with reintroducing that volume and the effort on those exercises than I will on exercises where muscles are being challenged maybe in the shortened range, or not as lengthened. So it could just be the mid range, or any other exercise that you don't typically see as being an extreme range of motion. So that's what I would say there. And an example of how you basically distribute that across the program, like I've got one of my clients' programs here, and we're trying to, like, he's basically at early access. He's living in Switzerland, so he's been getting back to the gym a little bit earlier. And on day one of his first session, basically what I've got built in here from is, he's doing his deadlifts, and because we haven't been doing any sort of heavy deadlifts before, obviously we want to build up the strength there again. We want to build back those adaptations. He's a rugby player. We want to get him back prepared for rugby, but we have to be conservative. So like on week one, what I've got programmed for him is 3 sets of 5 at 3 to 4 reps in reserve. Now that's pretty easy, right? So because like you can do 3 to 4 reps in reserve and take a minute's rest and just get them done, so it's not going to be a big deal, because a lot of people, they probably train more so in the range, especially on deadlifts where they're trying to, satisfy the ego. Like a lot of people do go quite close to failure, or maybe a rep or two shy. So 3 to 4 reps in reserve is quite conservative. But then what we do
And
over the weeks
just on
is,
that as well,
go
that's
ahead.
3 to 4 reps in reserve currently. That's
Yeah,
not
currently as well. Yeah.
3 to 4 reps in reserve of what you were previously doing. So just keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, that is really that's a really important point, actually, because when you are returning to training, what you're initially going to want to do is you're still going to be attached to the numbers that you were lifting previously. And this is something that everyone develops when they start weight training. And, even if you don't talk about it, it's definitely something that's in your head, where once you get over 100 kilos on the bench press, let's say, doing any less than 100 kilos, it just doesn't feel good. It's like 2 plates is just like your standard now, or if it's over 60 on the bench press, you don't want to go back to using less than the 20s. Same on deadlifts. It's especially the case with deadlifts, because if you're lifting less than 60 kilos on a deadlift, then you've got these smaller plates to use. However, for some people, that might be appropriate and it might be necessary. So lose the attachment to the weights and try to use something like a reps in reserve guideline, so that you can make sure that your weights are actually appropriate. So if he's doing 3 sets of 5 at 3 to 4 reps in reserve, that means that we'll be working with a weight that's somewhere in and around his current 8 to 9 rep max, let's say. And that could be the equivalent of what might previously have been his 12 to 15 rep max, so a weight that he wouldn't have even done deadlifts with, because it would have just been too light. Whereas now he's going to be doing sets of 5 with it. So it is one of those cases where you do just have to take the hit initially. But the good thing is that you're then building it up over the weeks to follow. So what I've got over
just on that as well, like,
go ahead.
It's actually much more fun this way, right? Because you basically get to be a noob again, right? So
Yeah.
remember all those newbie gains where you're literally coming into the gym, you're like, oh my God, I added 5 kilos to my lift, and you're feeling awesome about it. You basically get to relive that all again.
Yeah, and it is a good feeling if you can just take advantage of it and not get too excited about the return to training in the first session. I have a friend who Snapchatted me there yesterday, and he said he did his first session back and put 140 kilos on his squat and started to do AMRAP. So like as many reps as he possibly could. Like that was his training approach, and he wanted to call in sick to work because he was so sore and fucked. Like that's just what happens. Like, so yeah, I get it. Like people are excited, especially if you're returning to the gym with friends. You're all going to be like, yeah, we're back in the gym, bro. And you're all pumped. But probably not the best approach. But anyway, as I was saying, like with that client's program, essentially what we do then over the course of the following weeks is build up on week 2, 4 sets of 5 at 3 reps in reserve. So a little bit more intense and an extra. And then weeks 3 and 4, I'm kind of confident that we're getting back to a closer to what would have been his level of tolerance. And then we're getting a 5 sets of 5 at 2 to 3 reps in reserve. And then on week 4, 2 reps in reserve. So essentially, like, you've got some sort of sequence of progression each week, which, you know, mightn't always be the case in a program. But in this case, we're clearly building up our tolerance again. And because I know that was his previous baseline and what he would be able to do, I'm not stressed that week 4 is too much or anything. So that is an important consideration here, is what were you previously used to? Because ultimately, you know that you'll be able to get back to what you were previously able to do. So if I was you and I was looking at my program, what I would do is I'd look at my previous program. I'd see how many working sets I was doing per muscle group per week or per movement, or even just in total across the week, see what that looked like, see how many sessions it was spread across. And then what you can do is I would start with somewhere around, I think, like 60 to 70% of the previous volume you were doing is a sound approach. So if you were doing, let's say, 5 sets across the board on all your exercises, to make it real simple, then I'd start at around 3 sets. You know, it's a simple way of looking at it. Obviously, that depends on how many sets you're doing for each muscle group. So let's say you were doing on a Monday, you normally did 3 exercises for chest. So you did 4 sets of bench, you did 3 sets of chest press, and then you did 3 sets of cable flies. What I would start there is I'd start with 6 sets. So I might do something like 3 sets of bench press, and then 2 sets of chest press, and then 1 additional set of cable chest flies. And then over the subsequent 4 weeks to follow, I'd add 1 set per week. And you're gradually building back up to that level of volume that you were previously able to tolerate. So that's kind of the volume side of things. Like, this is
On that
not,
as well.
yeah,
If you aren't willing to do that, you're going to have to make a concession on the intensity side of things. So if you're just
yeah,
like, no, I'm just going to jump in 100%, I was doing 20 sets per chest per week, whatever. Like, I'm just going to go straight back into that. You're going to have to take them as lighter sets. So even if we're saying, you know, take 3 to 4 reps in reserve or whatever, if you're not willing to modulate the volume as well as that, then you're probably going to have to go, we'll say 5, 6, 7 reps in reserve. You know, you're
just
going to have to go
long sets.
lighter. You're literally just going to, if you're not willing to make a concession on volume, you're just going to have to go lighter with each of those exercises.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the key point there being that we're kind of recommending that you take the concession in both volume and intensity initially. But if you don't take the concession in volume, you're just going to have to pull back the intensity further again. So that's what I would do, is I'd start with maybe 60 to 70%. Again, like, that's not an evidence-based rule that's going to suit everyone, but it's a starting point. And ultimately, you have to be the adult in the room that is able to look after your own training decisions in the moment too. Like, so if you're in the gym, this has happened to me before, where I've returned from bouts of training, and if I do, let's say, loads of squats in that first workout, I know for sure that my adductors will cramp up and will strain if I push it too far. So if I'm in the gym and I'm following a program from Paddy that says, all right, do 4 sets of 8 at 3 reps in reserve, and I'm on the 3rd set and my hamstring feels like it's going to tear, or my adductor feels like it's about to tear off the bone, and I'm like, not too sure about this, then it would be advisable to, you know, actually listen to your body in that context and maybe adjust the remainder of the workout. It is something you do have to be aware of, because these things do happen. And I have had cases where clients have messaged me during workouts and they've said, hey, you know, this isn't feeling too good. And then they made the call to say, I actually didn't finish the rest of my workout. And I'm like, you know, good call. You know, that is the right thing to do in that context, because while we don't want people to be hyper vigilant of every little niggle that they get, if you're just back from a bout of no training and you feel like something's about to strain or tear or pull or whatever, that's what it feels like to you, and you have a good reason to believe that that could be the case, then, you know, it's better to be conservative and be precautionary rather than having to take 6 to 8 weeks out of training because of that. So yeah, volume and intensity, that is what I would say there, guys. I would also consider how many days you're actually able to access the gym and build your program accordingly. Because if it is the case that you're only going to be allocating your volume on one single day per week per muscle group. So for example, if you're doing legs and you used to do 20 sets for quads, let's say, and you're now going to return to the gym and, you know, you're going to cut down your volume a bit, but you're still doing it all in one day, I would generally advise, in your initial phase at least, try to spread the volume evenly across the week to some degree, because it's just going to lead to a much smoother transition to a higher level of tolerance. Because if you can spread, let's say, 12 weekly sets per muscle group across 2 to 3 sessions, that now means you're doing 4 to 6 sets per session, and you're far less likely to be very sore after those, and hence you don't have to deal with that initial discomfort that's somewhat inevitable if you do a really high volume session, because that can discourage you from getting back in the gym. For example, if you really, if you really hurt your hamstrings after your first workout and they're kind of killing you walking around, even if you're going in on Wednesday, let's say, after doing a workout on Monday, and you're only due to do mainly kind of quad focused work on that day, if your hamstrings are in bits, it's still really difficult to do something like a squat or a leg press, even if they're not, primary hamstring exercises in your program. So yeah, distributed across the week would also be wise. So they're kind of the main notes that I would have on.
One thing
Go
on
ahead.
this as well, right? So I'm just thinking of a slightly different scenario. Someone listening
Mm-hmm.
to this, and they've been before the lockdown, they had been training away in a low volume style, right? Now we could argue about what is a low volume style of training, because most people say like, oh, I'm doing a low volume training approach, and they're like, I do 2 sets per exercise, but they end up doing 10 exercises. So it's the exact same. They just have more exercises. But let's assume that's not the case. Let's assume they've been doing 6 sets. Let's say their leg workout is 3 sets of squats, 3 sets of hack squats, 3 sets of RDLs, 3 sets of hamstring curls, right? So relatively low volume in terms of per muscle group. It's 6 working sets per muscle group, right? Now, again, we could even argue maybe they're just doing 2 sets on each of those. So it's 4 sets on each of those per workout, right? And maybe they're doing something similar twice per week. So ultimately, they're getting about 10 sets of stimulation per week. So they're on the very low end of the 10 to 20 sets for hypertrophy, right? So those sets, they've generally been taken. Maybe they haven't been doing it, like I said, like the 3 sets of it. They've been doing 2 sets. One is a heavy loading set, and one is a back off set. They've been doing that kind of approach. So higher intensity and lower volume overall. Would they be in a better position to actually kind of maybe start at a little bit higher volume and just kind of ease back into the intensity side of things? Like, again, like they're like, yeah, I really like training with higher intensity. I like going heavier. I like really pushing it to, RPE 0, or sorry, RPE 10, reps in reserve 0, or negative. So for them, would they be better off starting at a higher volume position and then slowly working the intensity up as they drop the volume? Or what's your thoughts on that?
I think that's a good question, because it gets to the fact that in order, like when we're building back up these particular components of programs, we have to think about what component of the program the person is typically exploiting. So if someone is typically exploiting volume and maybe intensity, like they're not going all the way to failure in all their exercises, then volume might be the main thing that's going to push them to a poorer state of recovery, or potentially increased risk of injury as they return to training. Whereas someone who maybe is not on as much of a high volume program, but they take everything to absolute failure, the intensity is likely to be the thing that we need to address in that context. So what I would say there is, like, you probably don't, if you're that type of individual and you've always been trying to get away with less sets, then I would be less likely to say, okay, you need to pull volume back to 60%, because if you're doing, let's say, 8 sets per week per muscle group, like, I don't think you need to pull it back to 4 or 5 sets. But I think if you're doing 8 sets per week and they're all to absolute failure, and sometimes like eccentric failure, even where you have like a partner helping you or whatever, or maybe you do things like drop sets or whatever, I would basically just cut out all those things on phase 1 of your program, and basically try to start off maybe around the similar level of volume that you were previously at. It depends, but similar level, maybe slightly less. But the main thing I would be trying to address there is just staying further from failure, because this is definitely something I see as a limiting factor for a lot of people in terms of constantly nagging away at chronic injuries that they have, is that inability to detach from the need to go to failure all the time. And that's something I definitely had earlier on in when I was into, or when I was first getting into weight training and stuff, like for me, it was like, well, obviously you just go to failure. Like that's just what you do with weight training. That's what, like, because from watching YouTube videos, especially if you're into like bodybuilding culture and everything, it's like the main thing that you kind of brag about or that you take pride in is your ability to train hard. And very often that's measured in how far you can take a set. So I understand that. I understand the desire, but I think if you're looking for a smooth return to training and you're looking to minimize risk of injury and increase the likelihood that you'll make gains for the rest of 2020, it would be very wise to pull back and be a bit further from failure. So it might be new to you, but keeping maybe 3 to 4 reps in reserve on week one might be sound practice. And then, building that up to closer to what you normally do on week 4 might be wise. It's definitely wise, so they're kind of the main considerations from a volume perspective, an intensity perspective, and a frequency perspective. Up until now, what we've been saying is intensity, speaking generally with reference to how close you are to failure. But there's also a question, obviously, that comes into things with strength trainees. If you're primarily focused on strength, and that's like absolute intensity. So, what rep ranges you're actually working in. And this is another case where you have to think about, how this training phase potentiates future training phases. So in this, as you return to training, if you've been doing only very light work on the lower intensity end of the spectrum, such as kettlebell squats and kettlebell swings and things like that, then it's probably like, I probably wouldn't have you go into the gym on week 1 and work up to a single, or work up to, 90% of previous 1 rep max or anything like that. I would probably be more inclined to, if I was a strength focused trainee, I'd actually take this first phase to build up work capacity, you could call it, rather than trying to get into maximal strength. Because what you have to realize is that, your previous maximal strength was essentially layered on top to some degree of your general work capacity and fitness and the previous muscle mass that you had, so the hypertrophy. So it would make sense to structure your training in such a way that you actually try to build up those characteristics again before you start to really test that maximal strength. And that doesn't mean you can't start to bring in some singles for practice, at slightly higher intensities as the weeks go on. But I would generally be more concerned with trying to build up overall training tolerance again, and maybe building back a little bit of muscle and using this as a time for building up that muscle before you start to really focus on the maximal strength side of things. I also think,
And
go
you
ahead.
can even do that in the context of like re-establishing the skill of lifting
Yes.
like heavier weights. Like you can do like, so I know everyone always thinks like, oh, build work capacity or build, muscular adaptations or whatever. They're like, also have to do like high reps. And I know someone's thinking here, they're like, oh, I'm into powerlifting. I don't want to have to do like, set of 8 or set of
Yeah.
12 for my deadlift, and they're like, oh, I'm not going to do that. But you can still build it up with like 5s or something. Like again, like
Yeah.
you take a program like 5x5, you're just like, all right, I'm going to do something similar to that. And I'm just going to effectively go light on those 5 sets, but I'm just going to treat them as, these are just building my capacity to lift heavier in the future, like it's pretty much how you should be viewing training anyway. But you just look at it like, okay, I'm just actually going to go light these first few sessions back. Even if you are using a lower rep range, you're like, I'm just going to do triples, but you're going to do those triples very light, and you're effectively treating them as skill work as well as adaptation work. You're not trying to go maximal, but you're trying to relearn the skill of what does it feel like to be under something that's relatively heavy for 3. Isn't definitely not as heavy as you used to be able to do, but yeah, you're starting to feel it. And you definitely could have done a few more reps, but you're just going to rack it, and then you're going to do another set in whatever 2 minutes, and again another set in 2 minutes. You're just going to build a little bit of volume while also building the skill.
Yeah, no, that is a good point. Like I don't expect my powerlifting strength bros to start doing sets of 12 on squats and deadlifts or anything, but you can still use lower rep work, even in the 3 to 5 rep range, and start to just accumulate total volume in terms of the total amount of sets that you're doing at a lower relative intensity, so you could literally be doing work that's 5 reps in reserve, sets of 3, like something like your 8 rep max, and that can still be very productive training, but try to make it purposeful. I think sometimes when people have phases of training that are tangential to their primary goal, they tend to kind of, they're like, oh, I'm just kind of not arsed. It's
They
just
just go through the motions, like.
yeah, it's just a necessary evil. However, if you can kind of accept the novelty of it and be like, yeah, you know what, I'm actually really excited about this. It's something new. I'm going to put effort into it, and treat every, like, let's say you're doing triples with your 8 rep max. It's quite easy. What you could say to yourself is, I'm going to treat every single one of these reps as if it's my 1 rep max, because that's how you get the most out of this stuff is you set up exactly the same every time. And you're thinking, right, this is only 120 kilos, but I'm going to pretend it's 180 kilos, and I'm going to absolutely tear the arse out of it as I come out of the hole. That's your goal, that you're just going to absolutely explode out of the bottom. That's going to be your intent. If you can have that sort of intent, you'll generally get better training adaptations, and you'll have a smoother return to future strength, more strength oriented, maximal strength oriented programming that you partake in.
I agree. I have nothing else to add really to that, because I think that, like, that covers the majority of stuff that people need to be aware of when returning to training.
Yeah, I think it is most things, to be fair. And one of the things that, like I mentioned at the start, guys, was just really that concern about, asking yourself what you want to get out of this training phase. And I would generally set it up in such a way that it's a 4-week block. I think a nice short phase of training to reintroduce is good, because it's not so long that you're kind of prolonging the phase of returning to the gym, and at which point you're just like, oh, come on, I just want to train properly. So I think 4 weeks is a nice time frame to just say, right, I'm just building back up to baseline. I'm kind of taking a step each week, so that then on week 5 you can start to transition into more productive training. So I would say that. I would also say that, just ask yourself, as I said, the adaptations that you're looking for. Like, now is probably not the time that you need to be trying to build up your 1 rep max by week 4. Rather, you'd be better off to set the ground for having a higher level of tolerance for actually doing weight training again. And that's kind of what I mean by work capacity. Because work capacity, like, it's not I like the term, I do like the term, but it's not a single fitness characteristic, your ability to do work. Like, when you're talking about
It's
weight training,
general physical preparedness.
yeah, it's GPP. Like, you have to first be able to do the training and recover from the training before you can get maximal adaptations to the training. So that's especially the case if you've been doing no weight training, so you've lost all the skill components, you've lost the specific muscular adaptations to, let's say, length and range loading and muscle coordination and stuff like that. You've also lost the adaptations of your aerobic fitness. You might have lost a little bit of muscle mass. Your weight might have changed in such a way that the levers that you're working with are now a little bit different. So there's lots of different things that can affect your ability to do the actual work. So just by getting into the training process and building up your training volume, you start to basically get all those adaptations realigned in such a way that now you're prepared as an athlete to do better work and more productive work at higher levels of intensity. So just lay down the foundations for that stuff, and you'll be in a better place. And as I said, from a volume perspective, 60 to 70%, I think, is a sound heuristic to use. You might need less of a drop if you were previously on a low volume program, as Paddy alluded to. But in that case, you'd want to be more focused on pulling back the intensity. In both cases, regardless, I would try to pull back the intensity a little bit, so you are a little bit further from failure. And then from a frequency perspective, it would be wise to spread your volume across the week rather than simply trying to do all of it on one day. It will reduce the amount of soreness that you initially get. And that's most of what I wanted to cover. The exercise selection thing, it's really dependent on what you do and what you have access to. But in general, if you are doing exercises that are loading that length and range and that are typically leading to more muscle soreness, you might want to be a little bit more conservative with reintroducing those. And the only final thing would be to expect some degree of muscle soreness, on week 1. Like, that's normal. As you get back into the gym, it is normal to be sore. But what I would say is that if you're in absolute agony after session 1, I would maybe reconsider the rest of the sessions for the week, just to say, okay, maybe I did push it a bit too far. Just pull it back a little bit. There's no prizes. You're not getting a personal best on week 1. There's nothing that's going to come of it other than the feeling within the session. So use your reason over your emotion in this case, and you'll probably be in a better place in not just 1 month, but 3 months and 6 months down the line.
100%. And just to finally say, on the diet side of things, it should be aligned with your overall goals, right? So it's a return to training phase. I would probably be more inclined to have at least kind of maintenance calories. I wouldn't be like, all right, I'm going to return to training. I haven't trained properly, effectively for the last 6 months, basically. And you're not in the best position, and maybe you're like, all right, look, yeah, I want to lose some fat. Like the first 4 weeks where you're basically just getting back into the rhythm of things, that's not the time to be really aggressive with lowering your calories. We're trying to get the most out of this in terms of the adaptations, just so we can get back into some good quality training. So I would be inclined to generally have calories at around maintenance. I would say you can't just be a little bit below that or whatever. But again, we want to encourage recovery, so calories facilitate that, and obviously we want to facilitate adaptations, and again, calories and protein facilitate that. So it makes sense to have that stuff dialed in. However, that's not to say that you can't just do a little bit of a recomposition phase now, and have your calories a little bit lower. So you're like, yeah, I want to drop a little bit of body fat. That's perfectly fine. I have a few clients that we're still in fat loss phases, and we intend to keep going with that up until again, when the gym's open and stuff, we're going to continue on those phases. But we do need to have an eye to overall recovery. And if we do notice that recovery is just not there, and yeah, okay, we're losing some body fat, but we're 3 weeks in and you're still extremely sore from the training, then maybe we would look to increase calories and at least hit maintenance. So you just need to align your diet with your overall goals and with what you are actually trying to achieve in this kind of 3 to 6 week ramping on phase.
Yeah, I agree. Like personally, I don't think there's a right answer like in terms of nutrition, because we always go back and forth on this, and we discuss it on a podcast where you could easily make the case that, right, let's get into a surplus because now is the best time for you to be sensitive to training. You can also make the case that maybe just stay at maintenance because it's one of the only times you'll be susceptible to potentially losing some fat and gaining muscle at the same time. But then you can also make the case that you should go into a deficit because it's one of the only times where you're going to be able to probably make significant muscle gains while also getting leaner. So look, there isn't really a right answer, but I agree with what you said. And it obviously totally depends on where you're actually at. If you've gained body fat over the course of the lockdown, then it probably would be wise to get rid of that body fat, because as we've discussed many a time, if you have excessive body fat, it's not great for your health long term. So we generally recommend not having excess body fat. And then if it's the case that you've gotten absolutely shredded over lockdown because you're one of those people who, when you don't train, you just lose your appetite. And I know a lot of people like that. Then it might be the case that, right, bro, you need to start feeding up again. You need to get those gains back, And if you're someone who's like, I look more or less the same, just a little bit less softer, or a little bit softer, your muscles aren't bulging as much, maybe the maintenance approach is perfect for you.
And if you're like me, you've lost muscle and gained fat, then again, just give up.
Yeah, literally just give up.
But yeah, I don't think I have anything else to add to that. Like obviously, you really do need an individualized approach, and you can individualize it yourself. And obviously, you can come to us and we can individualize it. We do have coaching available, but I hope this generalized episode does help a lot of people get back to training, or at least think how they are going to get back into the swing of training. Because again, it's not like, it doesn't need to be overly complicated. You basically just need to take a few weeks of taking it easy, while still progressing. And that's the crux of it. It's literally just like, right, don't go in balls to the wall. Just take it a little bit handier. Don't do as much volume as you possibly can. Don't do as much intensity as you possibly can. Listen to your body a bit more and progress in a manner that allows you to see results, but also not get injured or not be excessively sore or not be, in a bad position long term. And again, it's pretty straightforward in terms of the actual concept. Just ramp back on, take it a little bit easier. You're basically new to training again, even if you've been training the whole time through. These are new exercises you're doing. Yeah, most people haven't been doing machines in their house. Although again, as I said at the start of this stuff, you actually just see how dissociated the fitness industry is from, real life, when people are like, yeah, man, lockdown happened, so I just bought €3,000 worth of gym equipment in my shed. You're just like most people are literally going to the gym just to, keep their health in check. They're not like, this isn't their life. This is just like, yeah, I want to stay fit and keep healthy. They're not going to be like, yeah, man, actually, I just kitted out my €10,000 Shomra out the back. Like, I actually got that built as well because, I wanted to, have a gym available to me at all times. And like most people just aren't doing that. They're like, oh yeah, just have a few little weights that I got from Argos, when I was
God,
10.
I thought that was the norm. Did you not buy the whole Cybex new range? Jesus.
Huge rack, everything. Like, but again, like, it just shows you that how dissociated from reality most people in the fitness industry actually are. Because I wouldn't mind if they were like, look, yeah, I know you guys don't have access to this, but this is what I'm going to do because, fitness is my life and this is my business, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, yeah, okay, cool. But no, people are just like, yeah, just get on with it. Just get your kit. Just get, all the machines that you need. And you're like, this is actually reckless.
Just just say, look, most of you spend like €20 on food every day anyway. So take that €20 on food, right? Save it up for the whole year and then buy a gym. It's not that hard. Just don't eat food, man. Jesus.
Easy.
You can care about your gains.
Reckless.
Right. Right. With that said, guys, as we mentioned at the start of this video or this podcast, whatever you happen to
It is both. So you're completely correct, Gary.
The Coach's Corner is going to be launching soon, potentially sooner, now that the gyms have been opened up sooner. We will potentially be launching sooner. We're not entirely sure yet, but basically, guys, it's going to be launching this summer. The Coach's Corner, that's a platform designed for personal trainers and interested trainees who want to further their education in a way that will allow them to make the world a better place through personal training, or through just
get better
guiding other
results,
people.
get better results with their clients, and ideally
Yep.
make more money while you're doing it.
Make more money. You sign up for me, I make you more money, bro. Let's go. Yeah, that's basically what's going to happen. You're going to sign up with us and you're going to 10x your income. Now, in all seriousness, basically that platform is going to be designed to educate you on all the subject matters that we think are, I hate saying subjects because it makes it sound so boring and university-like. But basically the anatomy, the mechanics, the exercise analysis, the physiology, and the applied nutrition stuff, some of the underlying biochemistry and stuff like that, the kind of sciencey side of things, that might be of interest, but in a way that is actually applied. Like, right, we've talked about anatomy. Now here's the leg press. Let's talk through the leg press in detail. What's actually going on here and why does that matter for your clients? And not only that, but how do you change that for 10 different clients? So that's the type of stuff that we're trying to get across in the Coach's Corner, is how to coach people and how to coach different people, because personal training is supposed to be personalized. And one of the things that I kind of have a bit of a gripe with is the idea that we often conflate findings from research with what we should do in the personal training world. And unfortunately, very often, if you're talking about, let's say, someone who's commentating on, let's say, exercise science research or something like that on the internet, then they mightn't necessarily have the requisite personal training experience to be able to understand all the different types of clients that you actually see, and all the different individuals that you see in a gym, and what their needs might be versus the kind of outcome of this one study, which basically reports a mean outcome. So that's the kind of worldview that I think we're trying to bridge, is taking, right, we have these average insights from the research and stuff, but here's how that actually applies to individual clients. So that's the goal.
I always think of, like, you see, like, in any of those like exercise or sports science studies, where you're like, oh, you just get the average, but if you actually look at the individuals, you're like, these 4 people they actually got negative results. The majority of people were in and around, they gained a kilo, and you see like 5 or 6 people, and they're like, yeah, these people gained like 10 kilos, So we know from the research that, some protocols work better for some individuals. Now, again, these individuals could just be hyper responders to training and anything works for them, and that obviously is possibly the case. But there is better ways to go about things for different individuals. And that's what I want to show you in the Coach's Corner.
You could be a non-responder to resistance training.
I'm
like
actually
me.
a negative responder myself. But
Yeah, I don't train because I actually lose muscle if I
Yeah.
train. Yeah, but there you go. But yeah, that's Coach's Corner, guys. So you can pre-register your interest below. You will get a discount. Um, and yeah, otherwise you can join the Triage Method newsletter. That's our weekly email newsletter that provides you with recommended resources along with all the content that we've produced, and importantly, excerpts from the Coach's Corner. So we'll be sharing slides and some video snippets and stuff like that in the email newsletter that will give you some insights into what's going to be in the Coach's Corner. And if you're not interested in that, then at least you get the free information. You know, why not? And join the Triage Method community. That's our Facebook group. And again, we post some insights in there. We post some unique posts. We keep people up to date on what we have produced. And people also ask questions that we're able to get back to and discuss. And then if you'd like to work with us, you can sign up for online coaching. We have online coaching spaces available. And if you are thinking about making your return to the gym as productive as possible, then that might be something that you might want to consider. And other than that, subscribe to our YouTube channel would be advised. We are producing a lot of content on YouTube. Would recommend getting involved with that. And just follow the social medias, you know, the Instagrams, the Facebook, if you want.
We need to start saying it as well. Follow us on Spotify because
Oh
that's
yeah, do that.
I love Spotify because you can listen to us in triple speed. And also, again, we are getting quite a lot of followers there because, again, I think Spotify is the new place for podcasts, even though it's kind of scum because you pay for a Spotify subscription, but they don't pay us. But, you know, they pay Joe Rogan. So maybe one day we'll get that $100 million contract, Gary. What you reckon?
No, I'm not actually a Roe Jogan fan. I think he's a bigot. Sorry.
What about Joe Rogan, man?
I'm just joking. Big fan of Joe Rogan. Go on, Joe. Yeah, boy. But yes, that will be us one day. 100 million. Just got to first host Fear Factor. Then I've got to become a comedian. Get a black belt in 10 Planet Jiu Jitsu. Maybe work for the UFC would be helpful. You know, be a hunter, be friends with Jocko, and then I think I'll actually be on the path to the 100 mil Spotify subscription.
Seems like stuff you could do in a weekend.
I know it's a bit weak, really.
Anyway, I have nothing else to say. So again, it is literally too easy.
Too easy.